Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. I've made 1,000 videos over the last 6 years, the vast majority of them concentrating on the affordable end of the watch market. But despite the huge number of watches I've looked at, all within fairly narrow parameters, there are still some brands that have, for one reason or another, completely escaped me. And I'm ashamed to say that one such brand is Certina. I don't really know why. I have got nothing against them at all. They're part of the Swatch group, obviously. They're great value. They've got a lot of history and some classic models from their back catalogue. But I've just not reviewed one until today. Are you a fan of Certina? Has my behaviour been disgraceful? What other Certinas should I be looking at to make up for lost time? Leave me a comment, let me know. Anyway, today I finally get my hands on my first Certina, but hopefully not my last. And it's a cracker. It is no less than the DS Super PH500M, and it is kindly on loan to the channel from my good friend and business partner, Mr. P. Now, he has been haranguing me to review this watch for a while, so let's flip the camera and get on with it. Alright, as this is my first Certina review, I thought it only fair that I should talk briefly about the history of the brand and the history of this particular model, the Super PH500M. The brand was started by Adolf and Alfred Kerf in 1888 in Grenchen in Switzerland. I'm not sure which brother this is, I'm not sure why they left out the other brother. They first started using the Certina name meaning surety in 1939. The now famous image of the turtle began to appear 20 years later in 1959. That same year, the DS concept was born, DS standing for double security, pertaining to both shock resistance and water resistance. Now, the original model upon which this one is based was launched in 1969 and was used as part of US Navy experiments. Aquanauts lived in an underwater laboratory in the Pacific for 2 weeks, conducting experiments and doing so with Certina PH500Ms on their wrists. 500M meaning 500 meters of water resistance, of course. That was a lot for 1969, and indeed this was one of the most respected dive watches of the period. Like a lot of Swiss brands, Certina got into trouble in the 70s thanks to the quartz crisis, but they were saved, hurrah, when they joined what would go on to become the Swatch Group in 1983. They started to re-release some of their classic dive models from 2018 onwards, and in 2020 they released an orange version of the PH500M. This coincided with their return to the US market. And in 2021 they launched the black version of the watch that I have in for review today. The official price of this black version is just under 900 Swiss francs, so around 950 US dollars RRP, but nobody pays RRP. The JOMASHOP price gets you a third off that, so 630, but they're out of stock at the moment. I'll leave a link in the description nonetheless if you want to set an alert. So there you go, all caught up in the space of 2 minutes. Let's get on to the packaging. Being a Swatch Group product, they're delighted to tell you the earliest possible date that has some vague thread of continuity to the current company. As discussed in this case, that date is 1888. The turtle appears on the box, as does double security. It's a very Hamilton-esque box, cardboard outer, cardboard inner, similar size and proportions as well. 3 layers of branding on the outer, the inner, and inside the inner. And there's a nice little high polished silver strip there just to add a touch of interest when you open the box. Now, this one came with a 2-year international warranty. However, Mr. P bought it from Masters in Time in the Netherlands. I've dealt with them before. They have pleasantly added an extra year. And there is the watch. Do you know what? It's not a 1-for-1 of the original, but it is very close. It has the sword hands, the sector dial crosshairs, aluminium bezel insert on a high polished cushion style case, just like the original. It also has the same unique spring-loaded locking bezel mechanism as the old watch. I'll show you that in just a second. I think it's only the second watch I've ever encountered that has this feature, and it's the first watch I've encountered where it actually works. And it shares some but not all of its dimensions with the original as well. It's 43mm in diameter and a rather girthy 15.2mm thick. Believe it or not, that is actually slimmer than the original thanks to improvements in materials and manufacturing, I'm guessing. Lug to lug though, it's a perfectly reasonable 48mm. Lug width is 20, unlike the original's 19. Weight as supplied on an excellent NATO, and that's not something you hear me say very often, is 108 grams, so that's pretty beefy even on a NATO. Crystal is flat sapphire with AR undercoating. Water resistance, we know, is 500 meters, and that is ISO rated, by the way, and the movement is a Powermatic 80 C07.611. You can't see it though, no display case back on a 500 meter ISO rated diver, but you can see the turtle. I'm delighted they popped it on the watch somewhere. It looks great embossed on the case back. Now there are actually several different grades of Powermatic 80 movement. This one does not have the synthetic escapement, but it does have the Nevacron hairspring to help with magnetic resistance. There are question marks about the serviceability of these movements, so you need to ask yourself the question, how often do you anticipate getting this movement serviced, and then start deciding whether or not the watch is right for you based on that. Swiss made 25 joule automatic, itself based on the ETA 2824, but with the beat rate slowed down to 21.6 to push the power reserve up to 80 hours. Now I had this one on the time grapher, accuracy was coming in pretty good actually at plus 3 seconds per day, but there was a bit of snow on the chart. It didn't look amazing, I'll be honest. The case is all high polished 316L stainless steel. It's a very simple case, no chamfers, no nothing. It's actually a quite slim mid case relative to the overall thickness of the watch. That's because it has a chunky case back sticking out underneath and a large bezel assembly sticking out above it. The bezel itself is really interesting. I guess you could say there are two very separate elements to it. The part that rotates is flat, it's also high polish. It contains a fully graded aluminium insert with a lume pip, of course, because it's ISO certified. And above that is a fixed high polished polygonal bezel that houses the sapphire crystal. It actually has 14 sides to it, and you get some really interesting reflections back from that upper bezel portion. The crown though is small considering how big the watch is. It's 6mm and it's recessed into the case. It's also high polished and features a C for Certina. Let me show you the bezel action now. It's a spring lock bezel. That means under normal circumstances, you won't be able to twist the bezel. You can see here I'm trying and nothing's happening. Now, that is perfect if you are actually on a dive in an underwater laboratory, for example. It's highly unlikely you'll bash your bezel off a rock and lose track of how much air you have. To rotate the bezel, you must push down and twist at the same time. It actually works very well. The only other watch that I referenced earlier on was the Jeanneau Ocean Rover that claimed to have a twist lock bezel, but didn't actually. It's a 60-click bezel, by the way. The action is a bit stiff and stuttery, but again, you are unlikely to move it by accident as a consequence. The black watch is supplied only on a NATO strap. There isn't a bracelet option. If you've been watching this channel for a while now, you know I'm not a fan of NATOs. I just don't understand what they bring to the table, apart from unnecessary bulk and questionable looks. This one, however, is probably the best NATO strap I have ever seen. It's over-engineered, it's thick, the stitching is amazing, the hardware is chunky, and the buckle and tang are awesome. The Certina brand name has been paint-filled. I can't remember seeing that on a buckle ever. The holes are reinforced. It's just a great NATO strap all round. God, did I actually say that out loud? Dial and hands, as you saw, pretty much carried over from the original. White on black, very simple. The Certina logo looks like it has been applied of sorts, perhaps it's part of the mould. It's there in silver, but everything else is monochrome. There are white sector crosshairs, Certina and automatic printed above the pinion, and DS Super PH500M, and then eventually Swiss made printed beneath the pinion. The hour markers are in white, all rectangles, slightly thicker, just slightly thicker on the major indices, and there are white printed minute markers as well. It's a high polished silver sword handset. They do have a slightly curved bevel down the middle, though it's barely noticeable, and it's an arrowhead tip second hand. All three hands of course have lume, as you'll see in just a second. There's a date complication at the three, just with a printed frame. The date wheel colour matches nicely with the indices. I'm not sure whether that was accidental and fortuitous or deliberate, but it does look quite nice for a 3 o'clock date anyway. That's it. I've already spoken about the aluminium bezel insert. There's a nice continuity actually between the dial and the bezel insert because they're both fully graded and they're both monochrome. If this is all too monochrome for you, don't forget the orange one is available for a few dollars more on a rubber strap. Loom, BGW9 I assume, so you get that ice white blue glow. It's only a printed dial though, as you saw, and it didn't look all that heavily printed from my macro shots. And when I turn up the speed, that's pretty much confirmed. The indices fade quite quickly, leaving only the hands and the loom tip. Now, they are still there at the end of 20 minutes, you can at least tell what the time is, but this thing ain't winning loom wars, that's for sure. On wrist, well, let's start with the down the wrist shot. 50mm thickness plus thick double pass NATO equals, let's call it plenty of presents, shall we? Good luck with your shirt cuff would also be another way of putting it. But the lug to lug is perfectly reasonable at 48, and the NATO is just so damn good that it wears much better than I thought it would. I've got a 7-inch wrist. This one is probably just outside of my preferred zone anyway, but I could totally get away with it if I fancied rocking a big watch. Interestingly, Mr. P has about a 6.5-inch wrist, and he wears this one no problem at all. So I guess it's just up to the individual what they feel comfortable with. White on black certainly keeps it legible though, as does the anti-reflective coating underneath the flat sapphire crystal. Finally, the pocket shot. I've got it done up quite tight, but it feels really kind of chunky, meaty, purposeful. It feels good. I'm not sure I could wear it as a daily, but as a weekend watch, you know, shorts and t-shirts, dare I say it, down the beach or in water, shock horror, this one would actually be a lot of fun to wear. Alright, moans and niggles. I already mentioned the question mark over the durability and serviceability of the Powermatic 80 movement. I still rate them though, I think they're fine, it certainly wouldn't put me off buying this one. And I already mentioned the slightly disappointing loom, disappointing enough that it gets a second mention in the moans and niggles section, especially consider this thing is going to sting you $600 plus. It's an all high polish case, so if you wear it hard, it's going to scuff up quite quickly, and the crown is really quite small, plus it's also recessed and high polished. It's not the easiest or most pleasant crown to use therefore, but at least it is recessed in the case, and that means it's fairly discreet on wrist. Talking about the on-wrist experience, yeah, it's a big boy. 15mm thick to begin with, and then you add this rather nice but thick double pass NATO, and you're bang on 18mm. Now, that is thick by anyone's estimation. I'm not saying it's awful or unwearable, but you will have to be conscious that it does stick up from your wrist quite a lot. As discussed, I've been inclined to wear it quite tight therefore to stop it bobbling around. Look, of course you can swap it out for a rubber strap or a two-piece Zulu or something that will change the on-wrist experience quite considerably. But it would be a shame to ditch this NATO because, like I said, it's probably the best NATO I've ever seen. So, by no means a moan and niggle free review then, especially considering the $600+ US asking price on a NATO strap, and that's grey market. You're definitely paying for the brand name, the brand heritage, the model history, and that's all fair enough I suppose. You're also paying for that increased level of water resistance though, but will you actually use it? I doubt many people will. But overall, I found this to be a charming big watch, and one that wears surprisingly well considering its size. My first Certina, but hopefully not my last. So there you have it. My apologies to Certina and all fans of the brand for ignoring their watches for so long. Nothing personal, I promise you. This one's really nice. It's big, it's chunky, if you like big and chunky. I'm not sure how many people will utilise more than 1% of its water resistance rating though, but I love the bezel. I'd love to see that on other slightly more accessible watches. Thank you again, Mr. P, for the loan. Well, I can't direct you to watch 2 more Certina reviews because this is the first one that I've reviewed, so why not watch this one or this one instead? Thanks for making it all the way to the end. I'll see you again in the next one.